Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the most dangerous promise you'll ever make. At exactly 5:42 a.m., every sound on Maple Street disappeared. Delivery trucks stopped before turning the corner. The old woman walking her golden retriever froze beside the flower shop. Even the sparrows that nested above Morgan's Hearth Bakery lifted into the pale morning sky all at once, as though they sensed something the people below could not. Tessa Morgan stood behind the front counter, sliding a tray of cinnamon bread onto the cooling rack. Warm butter, fresh flour, and roasted coffee filled the tiny bakery she had inherited from her parents, the one place in Belhaven that still felt alive despite the unpaid bills stacked beneath the cash register. She brushed a streak of flour from her cheek, wondering why the street outside had suddenly fallen so quiet. Then she heard it, not sirens, not engines racing. A slow procession of identical black SUVs rolled onto the empty street with impossible precision, stopping one after another directly in front of her bakery. Every door opened at the same moment. 12 men stepped onto the sidewalk, wearing tailored black coats despite the warming spring morning. They moved with perfect discipline, neither hurried nor hesitant, their pale faces expressionless, as they formed two silent lines leading toward her front door. People watched from behind curtains, afraid to step out. Tessa frowned. Belhaven had never seen anything like this. She reached for the sign that read open, suddenly wondering if she should flip it back to closed instead. Before she could decide, another door opened. A tall man stepped from the final vehicle. His charcoal suit looked untouched by the dawn breeze. Dark hair framed a face so pale it almost reflected the morning light, and his silver-grey eyes swept across the bakery window before settling on her. Tessa's heartbeat stumbled. 12 hours earlier, he had been sitting alone beneath her awning while cold rain soaked through his coat. He had looked exhausted, lonely, and strangely lost. She had offered him the last loaf of bread because no one deserved to face the night hungry. Now every man outside lowered his head the instant he took a single step forward. One voice broke the silence. "Your Majesty." Tessa's fingers tightened around the dish towel in her hands. Majesty? The stranger she had fed climbed the 3 wooden steps and opened the bakery door himself. The little brass bell above it rang softly, almost ordinary against the impossible scene outside. Warm air carrying the scent of fresh bread drifted toward him. He paused just inside the doorway, as though the smell itself carried memories older than either of them. Without a word, he placed a neatly wrapped loaf on the counter. It was the same bread she had handed him the previous night, untouched, carefully protected. Tessa looked from the loaf to the man standing before her. "You came back?" she whispered before she could stop herself. His expression softened for only a heartbeat. "I did." She glanced past him toward the silent guards waiting outside. "Who are you?" Instead of answering immediately, he rested one pale hand lightly on the wooden counter. "My name is Vincent Marino." The way he spoke was calm, measured, almost gentle, yet every person outside seemed to wait for each word he chose. Tessa searched his face, trying to connect the quiet stranger from the rain with the man who now carried the weight of an entire kingdom in the stillness around him. "Last night," she said carefully, "you looked like someone who needed help, and today," Vincent's silver eyes met hers without wavering, "today I came because your kindness has already changed more lives than you realize." Confusion crossed her face. It was only bread. He slowly pushed the wrapped loaf back toward her. "No," he said quietly, "it was mercy." He looked toward the brightening sky beyond the bakery window, before lowering his voice just enough that only she could hear the next sentence. "Before the sun sets tonight, there are powerful people who will believe you have become the greatest threat to my kingdom." Tessa stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. Vincent held her gaze with the sadness of a man who had carried impossible burdens for centuries. "And unless I keep my promise," he said, "they will come for you." 6 hours earlier, Belhaven had looked like every other small American town waiting for the day to end. The sidewalks were nearly empty, the streetlights reflected across rain-soaked pavement, and the steady sound of water tapping against Morgan's Hearth Bakery almost covered the quiet growl from Tessa Morgan's aging mixer as it finished its final batch of dough. She switched off the machine, stretched her tired shoulders, and glanced toward the handwritten notice folded beside the cash register. The bank had given her 7 days to settle the overdue mortgage on the building. 6 days remained. She folded the notice again before she could read it a second time. Worry would not sell another loaf of bread. She carried a basket filled with the last fresh sourdough loaf, 2 cinnamon rolls, and a small container of butter toward the display case. Only 1 loaf remained unsold. Normally she would have been disappointed, but business had been slow for months, and even 1 loaf left behind felt strangely familiar now. She smiled anyway. Her father had always said that a bakery should smell hopeful even when the books looked hopeless. Tessa turned the sign from open to closed and reached for the light switch when something outside caught her attention. Beneath the small awning near the front window sat a man dressed in a dark coat, completely still despite the cold rain drifting sideways through the evening wind. He was not asleep. He was simply staring across the empty street as though waiting for something that never came. There was nothing ordinary about him. His clothes were expensive, yet they were soaked through. His shoes were polished but streaked with mud from walking farther than anyone wearing them should have. His posture remained perfectly straight, even though exhaustion surrounded him like another layer of clothing. Tessa hesitated with her hand on the lock. Every sensible thought told her to leave. She was alone. It was late. She had never seen him before. Yet something in his expression stopped her from walking away. It was not fear she saw. It was loneliness. The kind that settled so deeply inside someone that they no longer expected another person to notice it. She opened the door. The little brass bell chimed softly. The stranger lifted his eyes toward her but did not move. Rain clung to his dark hair, and his pale face seemed almost colorless beneath the streetlight. Tessa stepped onto the porch, holding the warm loaf with both hands. Steam still escaped through the crisp golden crust. "I was about to close," she said with an awkward smile. "I cannot let this go to waste." The man looked at the bread for several silent seconds before answering. "You do not know me, that is true. Then why offer it?" She shrugged lightly. "Because everyone deserves something warm on a night like this." His eyes lingered on her face, searching for something she did not understand. Most people would keep walking. Maybe. She smiled again. "I am not most people." She placed the loaf beside him on the dry corner of the bench, careful not to invade his space. Then she added a paper cup filled with fresh coffee. "It is on the house." The stranger stared at the cup as though he had forgotten such kindness existed. Finally, he reached toward the bread. Their fingertips brushed for the briefest instant. Tessa expected cold hands after sitting outside in the rain. Instead, she felt something impossible, a faint tremor that traveled through the air itself before disappearing. The man quietly pulled his hand back, almost startled by the contact. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The rain continued falling around them while warm light spilled from the bakery door across the porch. At last he looked at her again. "Are you not afraid of strangers?" Tessa leaned against the doorframe and answered without hesitation. "Hungry people do not scare me. People who stop caring about others do." A nearly invisible smile crossed his face, gone almost before she noticed it. He picked up the loaf with surprising care, as though it were far more valuable than bread had any right to be. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You have given me something I cannot repay." Tessa laughed softly. "It is only one loaf." He rose from the bench, standing much taller than she had realized. Before stepping back into the rain, he reached into his coat, silver coin on the wooden porch railing. Strange symbols circled its edges, worn smooth by time. "Keep this," he said. "Why?" she asked. He looked toward the dark horizon where dawn would eventually arrive. "So that when I return, you will know I came to honor a debt, not to create one." Before Tessa could ask another question, he walked into the rain, disappearing beyond the empty intersection without once looking back, leaving only the scent of fresh bread, the mysterious coin, and a feeling she could not explain lingering in the quiet night. Vincent did not return to the road. The moment he passed beyond the last streetlight, two black cars emerged from the darkness and stopped beside him. Four pale men stepped out at once, their movements controlled but urgent. The tallest lowered his head. "Your Majesty, we have been searching for you for 3 hours. Vincent said nothing. He stood in the rain with the loaf held carefully against his chest, his silver eyes fixed on the warm paper wrapping, as though it contained an answer he had stopped believing existed. One of the guards opened the rear door. Vincent entered without assistance, and the convoy turned toward the wooded hills north of Belhaven. The town disappeared behind them. Streetlights became trees. Storefronts became stone walls. Within 20 minutes, the vehicles passed through iron gates nearly 12 feet high and followed a winding road to Merino Hall, an estate hidden behind acres of pine forest. The mansion had belonged to Vincent for longer than Belhaven had existed. Its black slate roof rose above the mist, and every window remained covered against the coming dawn. Inside, dozens of members of the royal household waited in silence. They had expected to see a king weakened by hunger. Instead, they saw him carrying a loaf of bread. Seraphine Vale, his chief advisor, approached first. Her silver hair was arranged neatly at the back of her head, and her expression held the calm suspicion of someone who trusted facts more than miracles. "You left the protected grounds without permission," she said. Vincent handed his coat to a servant but kept the loaf. A king does not require permission. A starving king should value caution. The room became still. Vincent had not fed properly in 30 days. Every sealed supply delivered to the royal estate had been contaminated with silver ash, a substance that did not kill vampires but made feeding nearly impossible. Someone within the court wanted him weakened. Someone wanted him desperate enough to lose control in public. Under the oldest laws of the vampire houses, a king who harmed an innocent human during an uncontrolled feeding could be removed from the throne. Vincent knew the trap. That was why he had locked himself inside Merino Hall for weeks. That was why he had refused every servant who volunteered to help. He would rather surrender his crown than become the monster his enemies needed him to be. Yet on that rainy night, when the hunger had become unbearable, he had slipped past his guards and walked toward Belhaven alone. He had believed the cold streets would be a quiet place to face the end of his reign. Then Tessa Morgan had opened her bakery door. Seraphine noticed the paper-wrapped loaf in his hands. "What is that?" "Bread." Several members of the household exchanged confused glances. Vampires could eat human food, but it offered them no strength and almost no flavor. To most of them, bread was little more than dust shaped by heat. Vincent placed the loaf on the long oak table. The instant his fingers left the paper, a faint golden mark appeared across the crust. It formed a circle around an ancient crown, then faded before anyone could speak. Seraphine stepped closer. For the first time, her composure broke. "Where did you get this?" Did she know who you were? No. Did she ask for payment? No. Seraphine looked toward the windows, calculating how little time remained before sunrise. "Did you eat any of it?" Vincent shook his head. "I did not need to." That answer frightened her more than the mark. Since touching the bread, the crushing hunger inside him had become quiet. It had not vanished, but it had loosened its grip enough for him to think clearly again. He could hear the heartbeats around him without craving them. He could stand near living blood without pain. Seraphine reached toward the loaf, but Vincent stopped her with one look. "No one touches it." Her hand lowered. "There is an old account in the Royal Archive," she said carefully. "A story about bread made through an act of unmeasured mercy. The record claims it could silence the hunger of a vampire king." Vincent's face remained unreadable. Stories are often written by frightened men. This one created a law. She turned to the royal secretary. "Bring me the keeper statutes, every version." The secretary hurried from the hall. Seraphine faced Vincent again. "If the mark is genuine, the woman who gave you this bread is no longer unknown to the court. She remains under my protection. You do not understand. If anyone else saw that mark, they will not wait for your protection." A guard near the doorway lowered his gaze too quickly. Vincent noticed. So did Seraphine. The silence sharpened. Somewhere inside the estate, a message had already been sent. Vincent looked toward the eastern windows, where the first grey line of dawn pressed against the heavy curtains. He picked up the loaf and turned toward the entrance. Seraphine stepped into his path. "Where are you going?" "Back to Belhaven. The sun will rise in less than an hour." Vincent's eyes darkened to the color of old wine. "Then prepare the cars." The convoy reached Maple Street at 5:42 in the morning, exactly as the first edge of sunlight touched the rooftops of Belhaven. Vincent had ordered 12 guards to come with him, not as a show of power, but because he no longer knew which members of the court could be trusted. Still, the sight of the black vehicles silenced the entire street. Tessa stood behind the counter of Morgan's hearth, one hand resting near the cooling rack, the other still holding a dish towel. She watched Vincent enter with the wrapped loaf, listened as one of the men outside called him Your Majesty, and tried to understand how the lonely stranger from the rain had become the center of an impossible procession. His warning hung between them. Before the sun set, powerful people would come for her. Tessa looked past him at the pale faces waiting outside. "Come for me because I gave you bread?" she asked. Vincent met her eyes. Because of what the bread became, he set the loaf on the counter and slowly unwrapped it. At first, Tessa saw nothing unusual. The crust was still golden brown, lightly cracked where it had cooled. Then the bakery lights flickered. A faint symbol appeared across the top of the loaf, a circle surrounding a crown. It glowed for less than 2 seconds before fading into the crust. Tessa stared at it. "What did you do?" "Nothing. Bread does not glow. This one did." She took a step back. The morning sun brightened the front windows, falling across Vincent's shoulder. He moved away from the light without seeming to think about it. Tessa noticed. Before she could ask why, one of the guards entered and stopped just beyond the doorway. A narrow line of sunlight touched the back of his hand. A thin curl of smoke rose from his skin. He withdrew at once, calm but pale. Tessa's breath caught. Vincent did not look away from her. "You asked who I am?" His voice remained steady. I am the king of the vampire houses that govern this region. The little brass bell above the door swayed in the silence. Tessa glanced toward the coffee pot, then the windows, then Vincent again, as if some ordinary object might prove she was still standing in the same world she had known the day before. That is not possible. I understand why you would say that. No, you do not. She pointed toward the guard near the door. People do not smoke in sunlight. He is not human, and you are? Not human either. Tessa crossed her arms, more frightened by Vincent's calmness than she would have been by anger. So what happens now? Vincent looked down at the loaf. There is an old law among my people. It concerns something called mercy bread. According to that law, if a human gives food freely to a starving vampire king without knowing his identity and without asking for reward, the bread may carry a royal mark. May? It has not happened in 300 years. Tessa gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Of course it has not, Vincent continued. The person who offers it becomes keeper of the crown. I am not becoming anything. The title does not depend on acceptance. Her expression hardened. That is convenient. He paused. No, it is dangerous. He explained that the keeper could examine royal supplies, question the king before the full council, and stop any declaration of war against humans until an investigation was complete. The role had been created to prevent another vampire ruler from hiding behind absolute power. Tessa listened in growing disbelief. You are telling me that because I handed a stranger a loaf of bread, I now have authority over a secret vampire government? Yes. And people want to kill me for it. Others may want to silence you. That sounds like a careful way of saying yes. Vincent said nothing. Tessa walked to the front window. Across the street, neighbors watched from behind curtains. Her bakery was already struggling. Her mortgage payment was overdue. Now a line of black vehicles and pale strangers had transformed her quiet storefront into the center of a spectacle she could not explain. Vincent stepped closer, stopping several feet away. You need to leave with us. No, Tessa. You learned my name. I had little time. Then use what time you have left to learn this. I am not abandoning my bakery because your laws decided to involve me. His eyes moved toward the folded bank notice beneath the register. He had noticed more than she wanted him to. This place can be protected. It can also be taken from me while I am gone. I can prevent that, by buying it, if necessary. Tessa turned toward him. That would make it yours, not mine. For the first time, Vincent seemed uncertain how to answer. She lifted the wrapped loaf and pushed it back across the counter. I gave this to a lonely man in the rain. I did not give it to a king, and I did not ask for a crown. Vincent looked at her hand, then at the bread between them. Outside, one of the guards suddenly raised his head toward the northern end of Maple Street. Another black vehicle had appeared beyond the intersection. It did not belong to Vincent's convoy. Seraphine stepped through the bakery door and spoke quietly. Your Majesty, they found her faster than we expected. The unfamiliar vehicle stopped at the far end of Maple Street, its windows black enough to hide every face inside. Vincent's guards shifted into a tighter formation, but no one reached for a weapon. Tessa noticed that restraint. Whatever rules governed these people, Vincent was determined not to turn her bakery into a battlefield. The rear door of the vehicle opened, and a thin man in a dark grey coat stepped onto the sidewalk. He did not approach, he simply lifted one gloved hand, showing a silver ring marked with the same crown that had appeared on the loaf. Seraphine's expression changed. A council observer, she said. They are testing whether the mark can be repeated. Tessa looked from her to Vincent. Testing me, testing the bread, Vincent answered. There is a difference, not from where I am standing. The observer remained beside the vehicle, waiting. Vincent lowered his voice. If you produce the mark again, the keeper statutes become active beyond dispute. If you fail, the council may claim the first sign was manufactured. Tessa stared at the loaf on the counter. You said this has not happened in 300 years. How am I supposed to repeat something I did not know I was doing? Make the same bread. That is not how baking works. Seraphine glanced toward the street. We have very little time. Tessa took off her apron. Fear still pressed against her ribs, but irritation gave her something steadier to hold. Then everyone stays out of my kitchen. Vincent immediately nodded. Seraphine did not. Your Majesty, that would leave her unguarded. The room has one door and no exterior windows, Tessa said. Unless your enemies can crawl through an oven, I will manage. Vincent almost smiled. You heard her. 10 minutes later. Tessa stood alone at the stainless steel work table while Vincent and Seraphine watched from the doorway. She measured flour, warm water, salt, and the last spoonful of starter from a glass jar she kept near the stove. Her hands moved from memory. The work calmed her. Fold, turn, press, breathe. Outside, the bakery remained silent. Even the council observer had not moved. Vincent watched every motion with an intensity that made Tessa uncomfortable. "Do kings usually stare at dough?" she asked. "Only when it may determine whether they keep a kingdom." She shaped the loaf, placed it in the oven, and waited. 40 minutes later, the crust emerged deep brown and perfect. Tessa set it beside the first loaf. Nothing happened. No light, no crown. Seraphine stepped closer. "Try touching it." Tessa placed her palm against the warm crust. Still nothing. The observer across the street lowered his hand and entered the vehicle. Vincent's guards exchanged uneasy looks. Tessa turned to Vincent. "There, ordinary bread." Seraphine examined the ingredients. "Was anything different last night? The same flour, the same salt, the same oven?" Tessa reached for the starter jar, then stopped. Only a thin layer remained at the bottom. She lifted it toward the light. Vincent approached the doorway but did not enter. "What changed? This starter?" She ran one finger along the worn label taped to the glass. "My mother gave it to me when I took over the bakery. She said it had been in Belhaven longer than our family." Seraphine's attention sharpened. "How long? Almost 100 years, maybe more." "Nobody knows exactly." Tessa explained that during hard winters, families in town had shared the starter when they could not afford yeast. A railroad cook had fed it, then a widow on Birch Street, then the church kitchen. During the recession, 3 different bakeries had kept it alive before it finally reached her mother. Each owner had divided it, shared it, and passed it forward. Vincent looked at the nearly empty jar. "It belonged to no single bloodline. It belonged to anyone who needed it," Tessa said. Seraphine opened an old leather volume one of the guards had brought from Merino Hall. She turned several brittle pages, then read a faded passage twice. "The law never says mercy bread comes from inherited magic. It says the bread must carry the memory of freely given sustenance." Tessa looked at the first loaf suddenly. Its value felt larger than the bakery, larger than her family, larger than Vincent's hidden kingdom. The mark had not appeared because she was special. It had appeared because generations of ordinary people had refused to let one another go hungry. Vincent's gaze softened as he understood the same truth. Then Seraphine looked into the jar and went still. "There is not enough starter for another loaf." Tessa frowned. "There was more yesterday." Vincent turned toward the front counter. The small back window above the sink stood open by less than an inch. On the sill rested a single grey thread from a glove. Someone had entered the kitchen before dawn, and whoever had taken the missing starter now possessed the one thing that could create another royal mark. The missing starter changed everything. Vincent ordered the bakery sealed, but Tessa stopped him before the guards could close the front door. "This is still my business," she said. "People in Belhaven will notice if armed strangers block the entrance." Vincent looked toward the neighbors watching from across Maple Street. "They have already noticed. Then give them less to fear, not more." He considered her words, then instructed the guards to remain outside and keep their distance from the windows. It was a small decision, but Tessa understood what it cost him. Kings were accustomed to obedience. Vincent was learning to listen. Seraphine placed the grey thread inside a glass envelope and examined the open window. The intruder knew exactly what to take. "That means someone learned about the starter before we did." Tessa looked at the council observer across the street, but his vehicle was already gone. "Was he here to watch me or to distract all of you?" Seraphine did not answer. Vincent did. Possibly both. A second convoy arrived less than 15 minutes later. These vehicles bore silver seals on their doors, and the woman who stepped from the first car carried a narrow wooden case filled with official documents. She introduced herself as Helena Ward, clerk of the Royal Council, and informed Vincent that the council had invoked an emergency hearing. Tessa was ordered to appear before noon. "Ordered?" Tessa repeated. "I am an American citizen. Your council does not control me." Helena opened one of the documents. "Under the Keeper statutes, any human connected to a royal mark must be given the opportunity to speak before the council. That sounds different from an order. It was written by people who believed politeness and law were the same thing." Tessa almost smiled. Vincent did not. "She will attend only if she chooses." Helena lowered her eyes. "Then I should also inform her that Lord Cassian Rook has petitioned to seize the bakery, the first loaf, and every remaining ingredient as evidence." Tessa looked around the room her parents had built with 30 years of early mornings and unpaid weekends. "When do we leave?" Merino Hall looked different in daylight. Heavy shutters covered every window, and soft amber lights filled the corridors with the illusion of evening. Tessa entered wearing her flour-stained jeans, a blue work shirt, and the same boots she used to carry 50-pound bags of flour. Seraphine had offered her formal clothing. Tessa had refused. If the council wanted the baker, they would meet the baker. The hearing chamber was larger than Belhaven's town hall. Rows of pale men and women sat beneath a vaulted ceiling painted with constellations. Their clothing was dark, elegant, and severe. Tessa could feel their attention move across her worn boots, her loose hair, and the faint streak of flour still caught near one sleeve. At the center of the chamber stood Lord Cassian Rook. He was tall, silver-haired, and perfectly composed. A grey glove covered each hand. "This is the human?" he asked, as if Tessa were not standing close enough to hear him. Vincent took his seat on the raised platform. "Her name is Tessa Morgan." Cassian examined the marked loaf inside its glass case. "A baker from a failing shop claims to have grants her authority over the crown. How fortunate for her." Tessa met his gaze. "I did not claim anything. Your king brought the bread back to me." A quiet murmur passed through the chamber. Cassian smiled without warmth. "And yet you expect us to believe that centuries of law awakened because you felt sorry for a stranger. No, I expect you to believe what happened, whether you like it or not." The murmuring grew louder. Vincent remained silent, but Tessa saw approval in his eyes. Cassian turned toward the council. The human should surrender the starter, submit to examination, and allow her memories to be reviewed. "No," Vincent said. One word. The chamber became still. Cassian looked up at him. "Your Majesty, fear has no place in a lawful inquiry." Tessa stepped forward before Vincent could answer. "Then why is everyone in this room afraid of a loaf of bread?" Silence fell so completely that she could hear the faint movement of air through the vents. Tessa pointed toward the glass case. "You have guarded estates, private roads, and enough food in this building to feed half of Belhaven for a year. Yet one loaf made from shared starter has brought all of you here before breakfast. That means the bread is not the problem. What it gives ordinary people the right to ask is the problem." Several council members lowered their eyes. Cassian did not. He slowly removed his right glove and placed it on the table. Along one seam, almost hidden against the grey fabric, was a pale dust that looked exactly like flour. Tessa knew at once that it was not, it was silver ash. Tessa kept her eyes on the pale dust along Cassian Rook's glove. It looked harmless beneath the amber lights, no more threatening than flour scattered across a baker's table. But she remembered the open window at Morgan's hearth and the grey thread caught on the sill. The thread had matched the fabric now resting before him. Cassian noticed where she was looking and calmly folded the glove beneath his other hand. "Do humans often stare at their judges?" he asked. "Only when the judge leaves evidence on the table," Tessa replied. A murmur moved through the chamber. Seraphine stepped forward, but Vincent lifted one hand, ordering her to wait. Tessa pointed toward the glove. "That is silver ash." Cassian's expression did not change. "Silver ash is used throughout this estate. It protects records, seals restricted rooms, and marks contaminated supplies. Finding it on a council member proves nothing. It proves you have been near the same substance that made your king unable to feed." Cassian turned toward Vincent. "Your Majesty? Is the human now conducting criminal inquiries?" Vincent's voice remained quiet. "She is asking a reasonable question. Then perhaps she should ask why you failed to tell her the full meaning of her new office." The chamber became still. Tessa looked at Vincent. He did not move, but something in faces closed like a door. Cassian smiled faintly. "You explained that the Keeper may inspect royal supplies and delay war. Did you also explain that the Keeper may remove a king from the throne?" Tessa waited for Vincent to deny it. He did not. The silence answered before he could. "Is that true?" she asked. Vincent rose from the platform. "Yes." The word crossed the chamber without defense. Tessa felt the betrayal more sharply because of how calmly he admitted it. "You knew before you came back to the bakery. I learned the law had awakened after I returned to Merino Hall, and you still left that part out. I believed telling you everything on Maple Street would place you in greater danger. You believed I might use the authority against you." Vincent held her gaze. "I believed others would try to use you. That was not my question." Around them, the council watched as though the hearing had become a performance arranged for their benefit. Tessa refused to give them one. She stepped closer to Vincent and lowered her voice, but every vampire in the chamber could still hear her. "Did you bring me here to protect me, or to keep me where you could control what I learned?" Vincent took several seconds before answering. "Both." The honesty did not make the answer easier. Tessa reached into her coat pocket and removed the ancient silver coin he had left on the bakery railing. She placed it on the long table between them. Its worn symbols caught the amber light. "You said you returned to honor a debt." "I did." "No. You returned because I became dangerous to your crown." Vincent looked at the coin but did not touch it. "You are not dangerous to me." Then why did you decide which truths I was allowed to hear? Cassian watched with growing satisfaction. Tessa understood what he wanted. He wanted anger. He wanted her to condemn Vincent before she understood the larger game. She would not give Cassian that victory, but she would not excuse Vincent either. What happens if I declare you unfit, she asked. Seraphine answered carefully. The crown passes into temporary council custody until a successor is chosen. And who controls that council? Tessa asked. Several faces turned toward Cassian. He spread his hands. The law controls us all. Tessa looked back at Vincent. You should have trusted me with that information. Yes, no excuse, no command, just the truth arriving too late. Helena Ward stepped forward with a sealed document. Until the keeper chooses to accept or reject her office, she is entitled to neutral protection outside royal authority. Vincent's jaw tightened. That protection may already be compromised. It is still her legal right, Helena said. Tessa picked up the silver coin, closed her fingers around it, then placed it in Vincent's palm. His skin was colder than it had been beneath the bakery awning. I thought you needed kindness, she said. Now I see that you needed a witness you could keep close. Pain crossed his eyes, quiet and unguarded. Tessa, that is not all you are, then prove it by letting me leave. The entire chamber seemed to wait for the king's refusal. Vincent slowly closed his hand around the coin and stepped aside. No one will stop her. Cassian's smile disappeared. Tessa walked past the council members without lowering her head. Helena and two neutral guards followed her toward the tall doors. Just before she crossed the threshold, the grey thread from your window matches Lord Rook's glove. Tessa stopped. Cassian turned sharply. Vincent continued, his voice colder now. But suspicion is not proof. Find the truth, Tessa. Then judge me with all of it. She looked back once. Vincent remained beside an empty throne, powerful enough to command everyone in the room, yet he had allowed the one person who could take his crown to walk away. Tessa left Merino Hall under neutral protection, carrying no bread, no title, and no promise that she would return. Less than an hour later, a column of dark smoke rose above Belhaven, directly over Morgan's hearth. Tessa saw the smoke before the car reached Maple Street. It rose above the rooftops in a dark column, bending east with the morning wind. For one terrible second she could not breathe. Then the neutral driver turned the corner, and Morgan's hearth came into view. Fire crews surrounded the building. Water ran across the sidewalk in silver streams. The front windows were broken, the awning had collapsed, and the wooden sign her father had carved by hand lay blackened near the curb. Tessa opened the car door before it fully stopped. Helena Ward caught her arm. The structure is not safe. Tessa pulled free. She crossed the street as neighbors watched from behind the temporary barrier. No one tried to stop her until she reached the entrance. A firefighter stepped in front of her and explained that the fire had started near the rear storage room. Most of the flames were contained, but the kitchen had suffered heavy damage. Tessa looked through the open doorway. The display case was cracked. The cooling racks had collapsed. Water dripped from the ceiling onto the floor where she had stood only hours earlier. The sight hurt more than any accusation in the Vampire Council chamber. This was not only a business, it was every morning her mother had opened the ovens before sunrise. Every holiday her father had handed free rolls to children. Every night Tessa had stayed late because giving up felt worse than exhaustion. A murmur spread through the crowd. Vincent had arrived. He came without the full convoy, accompanied only by Seraphine and two guards. His black coat moved in the wind as he crossed the street, but he stopped several feet from Tessa when he saw her expression. "Do not come closer," she said. Vincent obeyed. That frightened the crowd more than if he had argued. People knew power when they saw it. And they had just watched a king accept an order baker standing in wet ashes. A police officer approached Tessa with a clear evidence bag. Inside was a metal seal stamped with the Merino crest. "We found this near the rear door," he said. "Someone may have dropped it while leaving," several neighbors whispered. Tessa looked at Vincent. The seal was convincing, too convincing. "Is it yours?" she asked. "It belongs to the royal household," he answered. "That was not my question, no. I have never carried that seal." Seraphine stepped forward. Any council office could reproduce it. The officer glanced between them, clearly unsure how much he was expected to understand. "We will need statements from everyone involved." Vincent nodded. He did not threaten the officer. He did not order the evidence removed. He did not ask anyone to forget what they had seen. Instead, he turned to Tessa. "I can place the building under royal protection." "No." "Then I can purchase it from the bank before they use the damage to accelerate the foreclosure." His eyes lowered briefly toward the ruined sign. "Tell me what you will allow." Tessa wanted to accuse him, Part of her wanted the explanation to be simple. He had brought danger to Belhaven. His secrets had entered her. Bee was gone, but Cassian's glove returned to her thoughts. Grey fabric, silver ash. The thread on the window, the carefully planted royal seal. She looked toward the rear alley, where investigators had marked several footprints near the service entrance. One set carried a pale powder that had turned grey in the water. Tessa stepped closer to the barrier. "That is not flour," she said. Helena followed her gaze. "What do you see?" "The same residue that was on Cassian's glove." Vincent's expression, silver ash. Tessa nodded. "Whoever did this wanted everyone to blame you." Vincent looked at the destroyed bakery, "and they expected you to choose fear over questions." Tessa faced him this. "For trust, I will not. You lied to me. Yes, and this happened because your world found me." Vincent did not defend himself. He lowered his head, then knelt beside the ruined sign at the edge of the sidewalk. He picked it up carefully with both hands. The painted words were barely visible beneath soot and water. "I have ruled for 600 years, he said quietly. "I know how to command armies, settle disputes, and silence rooms filled with enemies. I do not know how to ask one person to believe me when I have given her reasons not to." Tessa studied him. The crowd had gone silent. Vincent Marino, king of a hidden nation, remained kneeling in the remains of a human bakery with no demand in his voice. "Then help me find proof." Vincent rose and handed her the damaged sign. "No secrets, no orders, no decisions made for you." Tessa held his gaze. "And no treating me like something that belongs to the crown. You belong only to yourself." For the first time since returning from Marino Hall, she believed one thing he said. Then Helena called from the rear doorway. Investigators had found the empty starter jar beneath a fallen shelf. It had been placed there after the fire began. Inside the jar was a fresh fingerprint in silver ash, and beside it lay a torn strip of grey glove. Tessa watched the evidence technicians seal the torn strip of fabric inside a clear bag. The material matched the thread from the bakery window, but Helena warned that matching fabric alone would not prove Cassian had entered the building. "Then we find what will," Tessa said. Vincent looked toward the ruined kitchen. The starter was removed before the fire and returned afterward. Whoever carried it needed a place cold enough to keep it alive. Tessa studied the empty jar. Starter does not survive well in heat, but it can stay active for hours if it is kept below 50 degrees. Seraphine understood first. The royal evidence car. Helena turned toward her. "It has a refrigerated compartment for blood samples and contaminated materials." The council observer who had appeared outside Morgan's hearth had arrived in such a vehicle. He had also left moments before Tessa discovered the starter was missing. Vincent ordered no arrests. Instead, he asked Helena to obtain the official transportation records through lawful council channels. Tessa noticed the choice. He could have seized every vehicle in Belhaven, but he kept his promise. No orders made over her head, no truth hidden for convenience. The records showed that the observer's car had returned to Marino Hall through the East Service entrance at 6:18 that morning. The vehicle was registered to Cassian's office. A temperature log recorded that the refrigerated compartment had been opened twice, once outside Belhaven and again inside Cassian's private storage wing. "That gives us a location," Helena said. "Not permission to search it." Tessa folded her arms. What would give us permission? Evidence that the missing starter remains there, or evidence connecting the storage wing to the poisoned royal supply? Vincent looked toward Seraphine. The silver ash placed in the blood containers carried a chemical marker used to trace restricted materials. "Do we still have a clean sample?" "Yes," Seraphine replied. "Then compare it with the ash from the footprint and the glove." The analysis took less than an hour. All three samples carried the same mineral signature, drawn from a private quarry owned by the Rook family. That was enough for Helena to issue a legal search order under the Keeper statutes. Cassian protested before the council, calling the process an insult to his office. Tessa stood beside Helena while the clerk read every charge into the record. Vincent remained several feet behind them. He did not stand in front of Tessa. He did not speak for her. The search team entered Cassian's storage wing and found rows of sealed cabinets, old financial ledgers, and crates marked as ceremonial supplies. The missing starter sat inside a temperature-controlled case, still active beside several containers of silver ash. Tessa lifted the jar carefully. Something in her chest loosened. The shared gift of generations had survived. "We have him," Helena whispered. "Not yet," Tessa said. On the lower shelf, she noticed a paper sack dusted with the same pale powder she had seen in the alley. The label belonged to a commercial flour distributor that had never supplied Morgan's hearth. Tessa opened the sack and found no flour inside. It contained copies of royal blood inventory reports, each showing which deliveries reached Vincent during the past 30 days. Every contaminated shipment had been rerouted through a warehouse controlled by Cassian. Vincent read the documents in silence. His face became still in the way Tessa had learned, meant anger held under perfect control. He was not only weakening you, she said, he was measuring how long it would take. Seraphine examined another ledger. He planned for the king to lose control in public. Then the keeper would be presented as the only lawful witness. Tessa understood the entire design. Cassian had wanted Vincent desperate. He had wanted the royal mark to appear. He had wanted Tessa frightened, angry, and dependent on the council. The fire was meant to destroy her faith in Vincent and leave her with nothing to protect except the promise of compensation. He thought I would trade judgment for my bakery, she said. Vincent looked at her. He does not understand you. Neither did you. The words were quiet, but Vincent accepted them without defense. No, he said, I am beginning to. Helena closed the ledger. This proves conspiracy, theft, and contamination of the royal supply. It does not prove Cassian ordered the fire. Tessa looked at the flour sack again. A shipping code was printed near the bottom. She recognized the first 3 digits. They belonged to a storage company on the edge of Belhaven, less than 2 miles from Morgan's Hearth. Vincent followed her gaze. You know that number. My father rented space from the same company years ago. She checked the delivery date. The sack had arrived the previous afternoon, hours before the fire. Cassian did not carry this himself. Someone local moved it for him. Helena searched the related invoice and found a name written in blue ink. Grant Holloway, the property agent handling Tessa's foreclosure. Tessa felt the final pieces begin to align. Grant had access to the bakery records, knowledge of the rear entrance, and every reason to want the building damaged before the bank auction. Cassian had offered him something more valuable than money, certainty that Tessa would lose everything. Vincent looked toward the sealed door at the end of the storage wing. There is one room the search order does not cover. From behind it came the faint mechanical hum of a recorder still running. Helena checked the floor plan, then went pale. The room was registered as Cassian's private council archive. If they entered without additional authority, every piece of evidence inside could be rejected. Tessa placed the recovered starter in Helena's hands and walked toward the door. A small bronze plate beside it carried an ancient inscription. She recognized one symbol from the marked loaf. What does this say? She asked. Vincent read it slowly. Only the king or the keeper may enter. Every face turned toward Tessa. She had not accepted the office. She had not rejected it either. Beyond the door waited the proof that could clear Vincent, save her bakery, and expose Cassian completely. Tessa placed her palm against the bronze seal. The crown symbol appeared beneath her hand and the lock opened. The archive door opened without a sound, revealing with black shelves and sealed metal cabinets. A single recorder sat on a stone desk beneath a shaded lamp, its red light still blinking. Tessa stepped inside first. Vincent followed only after the bronze seal accepted him. Helena remained at the threshold, preserving the legality of the search. On the recorder, Cassian's voice spoke with calm precision. He described the poisoned blood shipments, the stolen starter, the fire at Morgan's Hearth, and the payment promised to Grant Holloway once Tessa lost the property. He also described the final stage of his plan. At the next council hearing, Tessa would be offered compensation in exchange for declaring Vincent unfit to rule. Cassian believed desperation would make her obedient. Tessa stopped the recording. The room felt colder than the hallway. He planned every choice he thought I would make, she said. Vincent looked at the dark machine. He planned every choice he believed I had already forced upon you. Tessa turned toward him. You still have not told me why the Keeper Law exists. Vincent's expression changed. The silence that followed was not hesitation. It was shame. Helena quietly closed the archive door, leaving them with the truth Cassian had tried to use as a weapon. Vincent rested one hand on the desk but did not look away from Tessa. 300 years ago, Belhaven was not here. A farming settlement stood 20 miles north of this estate. A winter storm destroyed its roads and buried the fields. The people had grain but not enough to survive until spring. Tessa waited. My armies were preparing for a conflict between the eastern houses. He continued. I ordered the settlement's stores taken for royal use. The words were controlled, but his voice carried the weight of every year since. You took food from starving families. Tessa said, yes. Did you know what would happen? I told myself the kingdom mattered more. I told myself the loss of one settlement would prevent a larger war. His eyes lowered. The war never came. The room seemed to narrow around them. Tessa thought of the starter passed from hand to hand through Belhaven, fed by widows, cooks, churches, and families who had shared what little they had. The survivors made the first mercy bread, she said. Vincent nodded. They gathered the last portions each household still possessed: flour, salt, water, and starter. No family had enough alone. Together they made one loaf and brought it to Merino Hall. Why give bread to the man who took theirs? They did not give it to forgive me. They gave it to prove that ordinary people could show mercy even when their king had shown none. Tessa understood. The bread had never been a magical reward. It had been a judgment, and the keeper law? I signed it before the full court. From that day forward, one human chosen by an act of freely given mercy would have the power to question the crown, stop a war, inspect our supplies, and remove a ruler who forgot that power exists to protect the vulnerable. Tessa studied him. You created the law that could destroy you. I created it because no king should be trusted without consequence. Then why hide it from me? Vincent's answer came quietly. Because after 3 centuries of waiting for the law to awaken, I was afraid the first person worthy of judging me would see only the worst thing I had ever done. Tessa's anger remained, but it changed shape. Vincent had not been cursed by a stranger or punished by magic. He had carried the memory himself. His isolation, his refusal to feed from unwilling humans, and his rigid control were not proof that he had escaped his past. They were proof that he feared becoming that king again. Regret does not restore what those families lost, she said. I know, and protecting me now does not erase what you did then. I know, but telling the truth can stop you from doing it again. Vincent finally met her eyes. That is why the choice must remain yours. Helena opened one of the cabinets using the authority of the awakened seal. Inside were property records, payment agreements, and a signed statement from Grant Holloway admitting that Cassian had ordered the bakery fire. The evidence was complete. Helena gathered the documents into official cases. Cassian can be removed from office immediately, she said. The council will convene at sunrise tomorrow. Tessa looked at the recovered records, then at Vincent. He will try to turn the hearing against you. Yes. He will reveal your past before you can explain it. Yes. Vincent stood perfectly still. Then do not let him reveal it, Tessa said. Tell them yourself. For the first time, uncertainty entered his face. Not fear of losing the crown, fear of being seen without it. Tessa placed the old silver coin on the desk between them. You asked me to judge you with all the truth, she said. Tomorrow, give everyone else the same right. At sunrise the next morning, the council chamber was filled beyond capacity. Representatives from every vampire house stood beneath the painted constellations, while a smaller row of human observers sat behind Helena Ward. Tessa stood at the center beside the sealed evidence cases. She wore the same blue work shirt from the day before, now cleaned but still marked by a faint line of soot near one cuff. Vincent sat on the throne above them, his face calm and pale beneath the amber lights. Cassian Rook entered under formal guard, not restrained but stripped of his council seal. He looked neither afraid nor surprised. This hearing is unlawful, he said. Helena opened the first case. The keeper seal authorized the search. The records were collected under council statute. Cassian looked at Tessa. Then the human has accepted the office? Every eye turned toward her. Tessa felt the pressure of the room, but she did not answer him. The evidence comes first, she said. Helena presented the transportation logs, the silver ash analysis, the stolen starter, the warehouse invoice, Grant Holloway's signed statement, and the recording from Cassian's private archive. With each document, the quiet in the chamber deepened. Cassian listened without interruption. When the recording ended, he gave a small, dismissive smile. A private voice can be copied, a confession can be purchased, and a frightened baker can be promised anything. Tessa stepped forward. You promised me my bakery. Cassian's eyes narrowed. I offered justice. You offered property in exchange for a judgment you had already chosen. She pointed toward the evidence cases. You did not believe I would decide based on truth. You believed losing everything would make me easy to control. Cassian turned toward the council. She has already been controlled. Look where she stands, beside the king who brought danger to her door. Tessa looked up at Vincent. This was the moment Cassian had designed from the beginning. If she defended Vincent without question, she would appear bought. If she condemned him from anger, Cassian would gain the crown through her voice. Tessa faced the chamber. Vincent Marino lied to me. A ripple passed through the room. Vincent did not move. He withheld the full authority of the keeper. He brought me here before I understood what that authority meant. 300 years ago, he took food from a human settlement during a winter crisis. People suffered because he placed the crown above their lives. Cassian's smile returned. Then the judgment is clear. No, Tessa said. The truth is clear. Judgment comes after it. She turned toward Vincent. Did you order the grain taken? Vincent rose. I did. His voice reached every corner of the chamber. I believed protecting my army justified sacrificing people who had no voice in my court. I was wrong. Several council members lowered their heads. Others watched with open disbelief. Kings did not confess before subjects. I created the Keeper Law because authority without consequence made that decision possible. I concealed part of the law from Tessa Morgan because I feared losing control of what happened next. That was also wrong. Cassian stepped forward. A ruler who admits unfitness removes all doubt. Tessa faced him. You still do not understand what makes a ruler unfit. She walked to the bronze circle set into the chamber floor. The symbol beneath her feet awakened, spreading a soft golden light through the carved lines. Helena opened the Keeper statute and read the final question. Tessa Morgan, do you declare Vincent Marino unworthy of the crown? The chamber held its breath. Tessa looked at Vincent, then at the council. I declare that he has committed serious wrongs. I declare that regret alone does not repair them. I declare that he must reveal the settlement records, compensate the descendants, and place permanent human oversight on royal decisions involving food, land, or war. Cassian's expression hardened. Tessa turned toward him. Yes, it is. A throne does not belong to someone who has never failed. It belongs to someone willing to answer for failure before those with less power. She looked back at Vincent. I do not remove him today. I place him under the law he created, and I accept the office that gives me the right to enforce it. Golden light rose around the bronze circle. The Keeper seal appeared across Tessa's palm. The council erupted into shocked whispers. Cassian moved toward the central table. Then, this court has chosen weakness. Helena lifted one final document. No, this court has chosen evidence. She read the charges against him. Cassian's composure finally broke. He reached for Tessa, not with violence, but with desperate speed, attempting to pull her beyond the protective circle as the shutters above the chamber began to open for the formal sunrise oath. Vincent stepped from the throne. The first beam of daylight entered the room. Cassian seized Tessa's wrist and drew her toward the widening light, certain the king would remain in shadow. Vincent did not hesitate. He walked directly toward them as the chamber filled with dawn. Vincent crossed the chamber as the first sunlight touched the marble floor. The beam reached his hand before he reached Tessa, and a thin veil of smoke rose from his pale skin. He did not stop. Cassian pulled Tessa farther from the bronze circle. Using her shutters continued opening above them. The council scattered toward the shaded walls. No one spoke. No one had ever seen a vampire king walk willingly into dawn. Stay back, Cassian warned. His calm voice had finally broken. Vincent kept moving. Release her. You cannot reach her without crossing the light. I know. Another beam fell across Vincent's shoulder. His black coat began to smoke at the seam, but his face remained steady. Tessa felt Cassian's grip tighten around her wrist. She did not struggle. She watched his other hand instead. A trace of silver ash remained beneath his fingernails, the same substance used to poison the royal blood supply. The Keeper's seal on her palm gave off a faint golden warmth. Then she remembered the bronze oath circle beneath the floor and the words Helena had read from the statute. Evidence entered under the Keeper's seal could not be denied by any sworn officer of the court. Tessa turned her marked hand against Cassian's wrist. The golden symbol flared. Cassian gasped and released her, but from shock as the oath magic recognized him as a charged council officer. Tessa stepped away and raised her voice. Cassian Rook, by the authority of the Keeper, I order you to answer one question truthfully. The golden lines across the floor spread toward him. Cassian tried to retreat, but the light reached his shoes and held him within the oath. Helena opened the statute to the binding clause. The court recognizes the command. Did you poison the royal blood supply, steal the starter, arrange the fire at Morgan's hearth, and pay Grant Holloway to help you? Cassian's mouth opened, but no denial came. The oath would not allow it. His face tightened with fury as the truth forced its way past every careful lie. Yes, the word echoed through the chamber. Several council members lowered their heads. Tessa did not look away. Why? Cassian's voice became bitter. Because Vincent made us weak. He protected humans, feeding. He refused expansion. I needed him desperate enough to fail in public, and I needed you angry enough to condemn him. Helena closed the statute. The confession is binding. The royal guards moved forward and surrounded Cassian. They removed his council seal and escorted him toward the shaded passage beneath the chamber. Before disappearing through the doors, he looked back at Tessa. You saved a king who lied to you. Tessa answered calmly. No. I stopped a man who believed everyone could be bought. Cassian was taken away. Only then did Tessa turn toward Vincent. He still stood in the sunlight. Smoke curled from his coat and his face had become even paler, but he had not moved back into shadow. "Vincent," she said. He looked at her as if confirming she was safe. "You are free, so are you. Move." He took one step, then faltered. Tessa crossed the remaining distance and guided him toward the shaded side of the chamber. Seraphine and 2 guards lowered the protective shutters, cutting off the strongest light. Vincent sat against the base of a stone column, breathing slowly while the smoke faded from his clothing. His injuries were not graphic, but the exhaustion in his eyes revealed the cost. Tessa reached into the cloth pouch Helena had returned with the starter. Inside was a small piece of the first marked loaf, preserved for the hearing. She broke off a portion and held it out. "Can this help?" Seraphine nodded. "It should quiet the hunger until we can bring him a clean supply." Vincent looked at the bread. "That piece is evidence. The court already heard the confession." Tessa placed it in his hand. "Now it is breakfast." He ate slowly. The tension left his face one breath at a time. For the first time since the poison shipments began, color returned faintly beneath the unnatural white of his skin. Vincent looked at Tessa. "It tastes like salt." She almost laughed. "That is because it has salt. And something warm. That is what fresh bread is supposed to taste like." Around them the council remained silent, witnessing something stranger than magic. Their king had stepped into sunlight for a human woman, and the woman had saved him without surrendering her judgment. Vincent had lowered his voice. "I still can, if you break the terms. I would expect nothing less." Tessa sat beside him beneath the amber light. "Then start by keeping the first one." "Which one?" "No more secrets." Vincent nodded. "No more secrets." Helena approached with the recovered evidence and the signed confession. "Cassian is in council custody. Grant Holloway has been arrested by Belhaven police based on his written statement and the warehouse records. The emergency orders against Morgan's Hearth are suspended." Tessa closed her eyes for one brief second. The bakery was damaged, but it was still hers. The starter had survived. The truth was public. Vincent looked toward the throne, then back at Tessa. "The council will expect a formal judgment." "They will get one," she said. "But not today." Beyond the sealed shutters, morning had fully arrived. Inside the quiet chamber, Vincent placed the old silver coin in Tessa's palm once more. This time she did not return it. 3 weeks later, the council issued its final judgment. Cassian Rook was removed from office, stripped of every title, and sentenced to permanent confinement under the laws he had tried to manipulate. The members of his faction were investigated one by one, and those who had helped conceal the poisoned blood shipments lost their positions. Grant Holloway pleaded guilty in Belhaven to fraud, arson, conspiracy, and attempted property theft. The false debt records tied to Morgan's Hearth were cancelled, and the bank withdrew its foreclosure claim. For the first time in months, Tessa Morgan held a deed with only her own name on it. The bakery still needed walls, windows, ovens, and nearly everything else, but it belonged to her. Vincent offered royal money to rebuild it. Tessa refused the gift and accepted only the compensation ordered by the court for damage caused by Cassian's conspiracy. Vincent did not argue. He had promised to respect the difference between help and control. He kept that promise. The work took 6 months. People from Belhaven arrived every weekend carrying lumber, paint, tools, and food. The church kitchen returned a small portion of the old starter that Tessa's mother had shared years earlier, proving that mercy survived because it had never belonged to one person. Tessa combined it with the rescued starter from Cassian's archive and placed the jar beside the new oven. Above it she hung a simple handwritten card. "What is shared can never be completely stolen." Vincent also kept his promises. He opened the records from the settlement that had suffered 300 years earlier, identified the surviving family lines, and established a restitution fund managed jointly by human and vampire representatives. He amended the royal charter so that no decision involving human land, food supplies, or war could pass without independent human review. The keeper's office became permanent, public within both communities, and protected from control by the throne. Tessa accepted the position, but she refused an apartment at Merino Hall. She kept the small rooms above the bakery and traveled to council meetings only when necessary. Vincent remained king, not because Tessa excused his past, but because he had finally placed the truth above his pride. On the morning Morgan's Hearth reopened, a line stretched halfway down Maple Street. Humans waited beside vampires wearing shaded glasses and dark coats. No one was turned away. The first shelves held sourdough, cinnamon bread, and warm rolls. A second counter offered sealed, regulated supplies for vampires who could not afford access through the royal system. Tessa had insisted on it. Hunger, she said, became dangerous when powerful people treated it as shame. Above the front door hung the restored wooden sign her father had carved. Beneath it, in smaller letters, Tessa added a new promise. No one eats alone here. Vincent arrived before dawn without guards, official cars, or ceremony. He wore a simple dark coat and carried a rectangular wooden box. Tessa was arranging fresh loaves when the brass bell rang. "You are early," she said. "I was informed that bakers respect punctuality. Bakers respect customers who pay." Vincent placed an ordinary $20 bill on the counter. "I have learned." Tessa smiled and handed him a loaf still warm from the oven. Then he opened the wooden box. Inside, protected beneath clear glass, rested the first loaf she had given him in the rain. It had dried with age, but the faint outline of the crown remained visible across its crust. Beside it lay the old silver coin. "You kept it," Tessa said. "It reminded me that I returned to your door as a king, but you first saw me as a man who was hungry and alone." His voice softened. "That was the first honest thing anyone had seen in me for a very long time." Tessa closed the box. "Do not turn it into a shrine. It was bread. It changed a kingdom. People changed the kingdom. The bread only made them listen." Vincent looked around the rebuilt bakery as sunlight brightened the street outside. Special glass now protected one table near the window. Tessa had installed it without telling him. He noticed, but he did not make the kindness larger than it needed to be. He simply sat down. Over the following months, he returned every morning he could. Sometimes they discussed council laws. Sometimes Tessa complained about flour prices. Sometimes neither of them spoke at all. Trust grew slowly, not through grand declarations, but through truths told on time and promises kept when no one was watching. 1 year after the rainy night that began everything, Vincent entered Morgan's hearth before dawn and found Tessa placing fresh bread on the same counter where he had once returned her untouched loaf. He set the silver coin between them. "I cannot repay what you gave me," he said. "Then stop trying." "May I offer something instead?" Tessa studied his face. "What, a life in which you remain entirely yourself, and I remain accountable enough to deserve a place beside you." There was no court behind him, no crown, no demand. Tessa turned the coin over once beneath her fingers, then smiled. "You may start by washing the baking trays." Vincent removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves. "Is that acceptance? That is probation." He laughed, and she joined him. Outside, dawn spread gold across Maple Street. Inside, the Vampire King stood beside the human baker with flour on his hands while the first customers gathered beyond the door. Nothing remained hidden, nothing remained unpaid. The bakery was restored, the law was changed, the guilty had answered for their choices, and the throne had learned to kneel before responsibility. Tessa opened the door, warm light poured onto the sidewalk, and Vincent took his place beside her, no longer the lonely stranger from the rain, but a man who had finally learned that mercy was not weakness. It was the one power no kingdom could command, and the only gift worthy of being freely returned.